All right. You have to bear with me with a little bit of coughing. I'm still about chronic allergy issues. All right. So I'm going to talk about Hinduism and religious minority rights. And if we're going to talk about how Hinduism interacts with any religion, and in India's case, all religions pretty much on the planet are in India. If we're going to talk about how they interact and react and the issues that come about, then we have to understand how India tells the story of itself, or how Hindu culture and Hindu tradition tells its own story. This is really important. It's important for us, particularly in the work that I do with Hindu nationalism, but also in relation to how Hinduism is conceived as a religion, as a cultural entity, and a lot of this has to do with a very particular telling of history. Now, there is a model of history that I'm going to talk about. It's called the triphasal model of history. It is problematic, and I am aware that it is very Orientalist, and you'll see why. You'll go, ooh, when you see a couple things go up on the screen. But the reason I'm using it is because this is the model that is used in India. It is used in government issued literature, in educational texts. Hindu nationalists use this, Indian scholars use it, and we know it's problematic, but it's used because it helps further a very particular idea of Hinduism. So the first phase, we're looking at India on a timeline, right? The history of India. Yes, I'm taking you back to the history of India. We start with this idea of ancient India. And ancient India is really important for how Hindu culture and Hindu tradition is conceived. Now, I threw this slide up in I taught a Hindu nationalism course a couple weeks ago, and when I put the slide up, everyone was, we're starting at 4000 BCE? I didn't think we were going to be starting that far back. But there is a reason for this, okay? First of all, you have to understand that the Harappa civilization, or early Indus Valley civilization, is one of the oldest civilizations. On the timeline of history, it's in the same ballpark as Mesopotamia, Sumeria, Egypt, etc. So there's this sense of pride of being connected to a very ancient civilization. It's one of the great civilizations of the world, right? Furthermore, this civilization was not living in mud huts and pit dwellings like a lot of other regions in Asia. These were planned cities. These are laid out architecturally with walls, ceilings, etc. Cities. They're remarkable archaeological finds in the Harappa area. They have a temple, what they call the Great Bath. It's a very large complex that's got stairs and a big pool. There's evidence not only of people having cooking hearths in their homes, but also fire altars. So some form of consistent religious practice going on at this time. And most importantly, and perhaps a little frustratingly, is of course there is script. Script is a big indicator of what we would consider to be a marker of civilization or advanced culture, right? So there's a Harappa script that unfortunately has never been deciphered. It's one of the few ancient scripts that people have come up with some kind of good guesses, but really we've never been able to decode it. We need a Rosetta Stone type of thing. So with the idea that there's script that exists, we can assume that there's some sort of codification, maybe of rituals, or maybe some sort of doctrine, some sort of philosophy. There's definitely the idea that there might be a philosophy coming out of this period too, then puts this civilization on the same par as like ancient Greece, ancient Rome. Okay, so this is a very important part of the story of how India tells its story of its own history. Now, after the Harappa civilization, of course, of ancient India, we have you know, the writing of the Vedas, the writing of the great epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. We have the Puranas. 6th century, we have actual historical figures of Buddha and Mahavira Jain. We have the Gupta period, which is 320 CE to 550 CE, I think, which is considered to be the golden age of Hinduism, the classical period when all the great, the beautiful architecture and art and a big revival of language and sciences, etc., came about. So this is this one part of India's history, and it's a very important part of how the story of India is told as it relates to the discourse we're going to talk about a little further on. So then the second phase is the Mughal period. Mughal period is about 1525 to 1707, I think, is considered to be Mughal twilight. This is, of course, the time when Muslims came in to India. We have Afghanis, we have Turks, we have Persians, we have Arabs. We also have Mongols coming down from Central Asia, Chinese area. We have just pretty much coming into India at various points, which is also a very important part of India's history. India is very, it's very important that they understand themselves as they are not a, India does not go out and invade other countries, right? Everybody picked on India first, right? Everybody came to India, colonized, invaded, etc. So that's a very important part of this history too. So the Mughal Empire is talked about, particularly in like Hindu nationalist literature especially, as the stagnant period of India. This is the dark chapter of India's history, right? A lot of religious oppression, very bad for religious minorities at this time, supposedly. Supposedly there were mass conversions, there were destruction of temples, you know, a lot of abuses taken out on the native religions. Now the problem with this story is that it's only a small part of the story. People like to look at Aurangzeb, who was the last Mughal emperor, and he was not a nice guy. he was kind of a bad guy. Yes, there were forced conversions, there was temple destruction, though they speculate less than Hindu nationalists would like to say. But they tend to completely ignore Akbar. And Akbar was a very important Mughal emperor. He ruled for 40 to 50 years, depending on when you want to. He became emperor at age 13, so it depends on when you want to kind of start him off on his reign. But Akbar was considered to be a quote-unquote secular Muslim. Okay, we have this weird juxtaposition of terms, right? He fostered interreligious dialogue. He got rid of the jizya, the tax on the non-Muslims, which made him very popular, of course. In his court, in his circle of advisors, he not only had Muslim imam and type thinkers, but he had Jesuit priests, he had Sufi poets, he had gurus and Brahmins. So he had all different walks of life working with him and engaging in this interreligious dialogue to talk about religious pluralism and coexistence of religions. He also married Rajput princesses, maybe not so much an example of tolerance as other political motivations, but the princesses that he did marry, however, he did not convert them. In fact, he built small temples for them inside the royal complex, which is a pretty big deal when you think about it. So this idea that the Mughal period of India is this kind of backwards, bad, oppressive, dark age for India is really kind of a fallacy. It's only a little part of the story. Like I said, I don't want to say that bad things didn't happen. Of course they did, but there was also some really wonderful things that happened too, that really fostered a lot of inner dialogue and tolerance. Oh, and of course this came out of the Mughal period. That's not bad, right? They didn't contribute anything to India that they want to keep around, right? All right. So here's where your eyebrows should raise. Here's the third phase, colonial/modern. Very problematic, right? This is a very ugly Orientalist sort of construction to say that with colonialism comes modernity. Hooray! They brought all the great advances, right? Now, unfortunately, this is how it is talked about. The colonial period, obviously, being the European colonizing period. We'd start off with the Portuguese in 1501, arriving in Goa. This is the time of establishing a kind of Catholic stronghold in that part of India. And then, of course, we have French and Dutch coming in at various times, and, of course, the English, 1606, I believe, start East India Trading Company. There is a time of modernity that happens alongside of this, and pairing these two together, obviously, you end up with a sort of idea that Europe brought modernity with them. But the way it's discussed in a lot of nationalist literature and a lot of government literature is that this is kind of a time of India's blossoming. Okay, it just happened to coincide with the British period. So we have advances in technology and industry and science, and we have Sanskrit scholars coming in from, well, we have Sanskrit scholars that are being created actually at that time, because when the English first came in, nobody spoke Sanskrit. I think who was the first? Was Mill the first Sanskrit scholar? Jones, yes, Sir William Jones, the first Sanskrit scholar. So, and it took him 10 years, I believe, to become a Sanskrit scholar. So we have this shared learning and this period of modernity that's going on. Now, the reason that this is broken up this way is because this is relates to how we're going to talk about this construction of Hinduism. Hinduism, which is this problematic category, right? Because you know, we're using a term that refers to, I don't know how many, hundreds and hundreds of religious practices, really. When I went to school in London, nobody said the word Hinduism without going like this around it. Hinduism, which got really annoying after a while, so I'm not going to do that. But understand that it's a complex term. It refers to a plethora of religious traditions, some of which don't even recognize the Vedas, you know? Maybe they've never seen the Vedas. You might have a very local bhakti-type practice that uses no texts, that doesn't even revere one of the main deities like Krishna or Shiva or Vishnu. It might be a very local deity that's specific to that particular region. Then you have, of course, what I was talking about earlier, the Brahmanic type of Hinduism, which would be looking at Vedas, looking at Manusmriti, considering Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva to be kind of the triad of Hindu deities. So you have this full range. So we use Hinduism just to refer to the general, multiple religious tradition of India, okay? It's a very broad term. And to underscore that point, okay, so this is based on the 2010 census, which the data is now just coming out. It's going to be a really interesting census. They did a lot of work on caste, so I'm curious to see how those statistics come out. Hinduism is 80.5%. Islam is the next largest religion, 13.4%. India is the second largest Muslim population country with the second largest Muslim population in the world. That's what I want to say. And then a very distant third, we have Sikhism, or Christianity, I'm sorry. We have Sikhism, Buddhism, and Jainism, and not even on this chart are Zoroastrianism or Parsis. And, of course, there is a Jewish community that came to India quite early on. So, obviously, we have an incredible diversity. And since Hinduism is by far the majority religion, we need to be concerned with how it's going to act when it comes in contact with all these other religions. There are many other religions to come in contact with. Now, there is a figure named Swami Vivekananda. He was born 1863, died 1902, and he was a student of Ramakrishna, and he was chosen to represent, kind of be a spokesperson for Hinduism at the Parliament of World Religions in Chicago in 1893. So this was a parliament that was supposed to be talking about all different religions from around the world, create some interfaith dialogue at a very early time. And for many people, this was their introduction to Hinduism. Okay, so imagine sitting in this, stuffy auditorium or wherever in Chicago, 1893, and this man comes up and he's got a turban and a little orange tunic, right? He looks very strange, and he's going to tell you what Hinduism is, and this is what he says, and this is large sections from his speech. I am proud to belong to a religion which has taught the world both tolerance and universal acceptance. We believe not only in universal toleration, but we accept all religions as true. I am proud to belong to a nation which has sheltered the persecuted and the refugees of all religions and all nations of the earth. I will quote to you, brethren, a few lines from a hymn which I remember to have repeated from my earliest boyhood, which is every day repeated by millions of human beings. As the different streams having their sources in different places all mingle their water in the sea, so, O Lord, the different paths which men take through different tendencies, various though they appear, crooked or straight, all lead to Thee. Sectarianism, bigotry, and its horrible descendant fanaticism have long possessed this beautiful earth. They have filled the earth with violence, drenched it often and often with human blood, destroyed civilization, and sent whole nations to despair. I fervently hope that the bell that tolled this morning in honor of this convention may be the death knell for all fanaticism, of all persecutions with the sword or with the pen, and of all uncharitable feelings between persons wending their way to the same goal. Nice, right? If that's your first dose of Hinduism, you got to be like, awesome, right? Sounds great. So this very important points, and this is why Vivekananda is very influential, is because he's talking about Hinduism in a sense of universal toleration. Okay, tolerance being a very key factor, very key characteristic of Hinduism, and something that maybe makes it a little unique, right? He quotes, I believe, this is from the Gita, is it not? Okay. So he's, the first one, yeah. So he's quoting from the Gita, this idea that we have many different paths, but we all end up to the same goal. We're all trying to get the same truth. So this is a very beautiful, very universalistic type of language. And this ends up being very influential, in particular vision of Hinduism as it stands even today. I also think it's very interesting that he comments that that violence comes from this religious intolerance. I think that's implied here, that this understanding and this convention and having this discussion is going to somehow help quell the violence and misunderstandings between religions. Now, another figure who's very influenced by Swami Vivekananda is Aurobindo Ghosh. And Aurobindo has a famous speech called Uttapara speech. This was the last public speech he gave. He was in politics for a while, and then he ended up becoming an ascetic, a monk. This is the last speech he gave before he kind of left for that path. And he says, Hindu religion is not circumscribed by the confines of a single country. It does not belong peculiarly and forever to a bounded part of the world. That which we call the Hindu religion is really the eternal religion, because it is the universal religion which embraces all others. If a religion is not universal, it cannot be eternal. A narrow religion, a sectarian religion, an exclusive religion, could live only for a limited time and a limited purpose. This is the one religion that could triumph over materialism by including and anticipating the discoveries of science and the speculations of philosophy. So he talks about the universal religion. I wrote a word up there, Sanatana Dharma. This is a term he coined. It shows up in all forms of literature. It's very strange to see it pop up in on the chalkboard, sorry. I'm waving to whoever's looking that direction. But it pops up in all different forms. It pops up in very pluralistic, very kind of soft versions of Hinduism, and it pops up on radical Hindu nationalist sites too. It's very strange how they invoke this idea of universal religion, maybe a little differently. But so we have the same type of thing. We have this kind of eternal, this idea of Hinduism as eternal, and this relates to this idea of ancient India, okay? This idea of Hinduism and Hindu culture, because really Hindu religion, I think it's maybe more appropriately to call it Hindu culture, because it's religion and culture are very conflated in India. But that this extends way back, right? This is timeless. This is beyond history. There's something eternal about it. There's this very sort of romantic sort of imagining of Hindu culture and Hindu tradition extending so far back that it's almost beyond time and history. So we have this idea of universalism, and this is invoked at this time too. Now, Vivekananda and Aurobindo were very influential for Hindu nationalists. Gandhi, of course, in this camp, taking up this kind of torch of much more trying to oppose Western materialism with this idea of a little more spiritual, a higher spiritual type of goal. But this is only one side of what I'm interested in Hindu nationalism. Hindu nationalism kind of breaks off into this side, but also breaks off into a much more radicalized, more religious side as well. So I have a couple more quotes I think are interesting to just kind of hammer home this idea of history and how India is talked about. So when we talk about tolerance and accommodation, there's a pretty well-known piece called Semitic Monotheism. BJP uses it on their website. BJP is one of the most forward-facing sort of Hindu nationalist groups. I've seen it on other websites as well. We therefore welcomed all, whether it was the Parsis who came fleeing from the slaughter of Islamic theocratic marauders and received protection here for their race and their religion, or the Jews who were slaughtered and maimed everywhere else in the world. They all found a secure refuge here, along with their culture, civilization, religion, and the book. Okay, so now dovetailed onto this idea of universalism and tolerance, which are inherently Hindu qualities, apparently, and this idea of timeless history, right? We also now have this layer of accommodation. India's always had open arms, right? You're a persecuted faith, come on down, right? They were the early refuge for the Jews before, Israel was around, before America, before Europe was taking them in. They came to India. Parsis, the Zoroastrians, came in as well. And the fact that they're invoking specifically the slaughter of Islamic theocratic marauders, okay, setting up who are the bad guys here. theocracy, narrow types of dogmatic types of religion. So this dichotomy is starting to be set up here in this sort of language. But you see this rhetoric over and over in all these different places. I'm very fascinated by this because I think this whole idea of the story that Hindu nationalism or that Hindu culture wants to tell, not Hindu nationalism by default, but the story that Hindu culture wants to tell about itself is a very beautiful story. But as we'll see, it's not going to quite pan out that way on the ground. Another quote, bear with me, I'm sorry, some of this is kind of repetitive, but India has historically been a refuge and sheltered people of all religions, creeds, and beliefs. Zoroastrians, Jews, Sufis, and more recently Baha'is were all granted protection and security when they sought it. They were accepted into the fold of the mainstream society, given land and equal opportunity to excel in a profession of choice, and remain Indians. Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, and Sikhism are all religions of the land. All were born in India. They consider those all Hinduism, by the way. There's kind of an umbrella term, Hinduism. The Central Asian invaders brought Islam. The colonial powers brought Christianity. India remained a large-hearted host to all, enriched its cultural heritage, and became a truly secular nation. People from all communities rose to become the eminent citizens of the land. And this is the first in their series, Jewish Community of India. Okay, so this is leading, as you can tell, as a prologue to a larger series where they're going to talk about the Jewish community of India. Now the thing is that the website I pulled this from is a radical, bad news, Hindutva militant website. Okay, we're talking really virulent, worst case scenario propaganda on this website. It's Bajrang Dal is hosted by this website. There's a hit list of academics on this website, and by hit list I mean hit list. It's interesting to look at. But the fact that this rhetoric is on this kind of website, I think is interesting because once again, as militant as they are, as radical as they are, they still come back to this idea of India being inherently tolerant, or specifically Hinduism being inherently tolerant and naturally accommodating, right? So I think that is extremely interesting. All right, so if we're going to talk about Christianity, I think, I do a lot of work with communal violence, communal tensions, and that tends to be Hindu-Muslim. Usually when you're talking about communal tensions in India, you're talking about Hindu-Muslim tensions. And these are a little different than something like Hindu-Christian tensions. Hindu-Muslim tensions arise out of this history that's particularly located with the Mughal Empire, what I call, this is my own phrasing, a conversation of violence. This is kind of like schoolyard, he did it first, he started it, so I got to hit back, that type of thing. So where that you have this thing where like all violence is legitimated because historically they started it. They came here and picked the fight, so you have that sort of thing going on. So that's a little different going on with Islam. With Christianity, you have different tensions, okay? So I just have some pictures. I love this picture of Jesus in the lotus position. I think it's a fabulous picture. But you have this Christian presence in India, obviously. It's a crazy church. But these are churches, all three of these churches, I believe, are in Goa, if I'm not mistaken. One is Catholic, one is Syrian, and one is, I'm not quite sure. But yeah, so you have this Christian presence in India, obviously. Now, we have, as I said, 2.5%, 2.4% of the population. It says 24 million adherents, okay? So it's a fair number. This is located mostly in the south and western states of India, so we're talking along here at the bottom left is where Goa is. This is where the Portuguese came in and arrived, and then you have other areas where it's spread. Obviously, places where there were English strongholds during the East Indian Trading Company will be nice pockets of where missionary work was. So you have it particularly along the south and along this one side, along the eastern side. So scholars debate a little bit about when Christianity actually arrived in India. Some say it was as early as the 1st century, but they tend to agree on that it was pretty firmly rooted by the 3rd. Okay, about 3rd century CE, we have a fairly strongly established Christian community at that time, small as it may be. Of course, we have, it really gets going during colonial periods. We have lots of conversion that's happening with the arrival of the Portuguese in 1501, followed by British and the other European colonizers. So we definitely have missionaries. We have both Protestant and Catholic missionaries who are very active at this time. Now, conversion is seen as a threat. This is why Christianity and Islam are considered to be the threats to Hinduness. Buddhism is not a threat, okay? Sikhism is not a threat. Jainism, etc. These are not threats. And Judaism is not a threat. You know, we have this, this tribute to Jews on, the Hindu unity site. It's because they don't proselytize. They are a non-missionary religion, right? So, as I mentioned, Islam, I think the threat comes more from this kind of historical dialogue that's been going on. But Christianity, the threat is very direct. It's about conversion. Now, freedom of religion in India is guaranteed by the country's constitution as a fundamental right. And they have tried to implement anti-conversion laws. Certain states have. Gujarat, for example, passed it in 2003, I believe, after the Gujarat riots. And these are supposed to be laws which prevent physical, violent, coercive type conversion, right? Gujarat actually amended their law in 2006 saying, if you're Buddhist or Jain, you're not actually converting. If you go from Buddhism to Hinduism, that's not really conversion. It's kind of the same. They've amended it a little bit to actually talk about what is conversion. But the problem with the anti-conversion laws is that it's very difficult to enforce. And the argument about them, against them, is that if you really have someone doing something that's actually physically coercive, then this falls under jurisdiction of the Indian Penal Code anyway. So, a lot of people feel that the anti-conversion laws are very ineffective and kind of superfluous. Now, as you might imagine, the big target for conversion in India were the Dalits. 70% of India's Christians are Dalits. If you don't know what a Dalit is, that is the politically correct term for what were called untouchables during colonial period. You have the Varna system, you have the Dalits who fall kind of outside the Varna system. And then outside of that are the Adivasis, which are the tribals. These are native indigenous people who probably don't even identify as Hindu and are also a big target for conversion. Dr. Sharma talked about the nuances of caste. Caste is often used, that you have the Varna system, which are your stratification, right? That's also called caste. More properly are jatis. Jatis are the little caste, the little subcastes within the larger castes. These are endogamous family groups. They're work-related, related to professions. There are thousands and thousands of them, right? So when we talk about scheduled castes or backwards castes, we're talking about these subcastes, which even within their own tier are the lowest of the low, are the ones who are the most marginalized, who have the least amount of benefits and need the most attention. 70% of India's Christians are Dalits. 9% of these are the scheduled caste status. Now, the government does review from time to time these groups to see who gets to have the status and who doesn't. Sometimes a group will lose the status, and then they'll petition the government that they want it back, because there are certain benefits to being scheduled caste, even though it's a rough life. 32.8% have scheduled tribe status. So this is the Adivasis. These are the tribes. The tribals are considered to be different than the Dalits. And then 24.8% belong to other groups. So the benefit is reservations. Reservations are similar to affirmative action in the U.S., and I presume there's something similar to that in Canada, where a certain number of government jobs, university admissions, parliament seats, whatever, are reserved for a certain group of people, usually a minority group or an underprivileged group. This is to allow some sort of idea of equality, right? Now, reservation is available to Dalits. They get to have these special allowances, but only if they're Hindu, Buddhist, or Sikh, or Jain is probably missing from that list. If you're a Dalit and you convert, you lose that status. You do not get to be participate in the reservation system. So this is very problematic from an economic standpoint. Also, I didn't put it on here, but I should just mention it. Reconversion is a big project of the VHP. VHP is another major Hindu nationalist group. As you can imagine, since the tribals are not particularly with anything that we would officially call Hindu, right? I.e. voting Hindu, right? Because that's really what it comes down to is votes. Hindu nationalist groups are very aggressive in trying to get tribals to identify as, Hindu is a religious category or a cultural category. If they can bring them into that fold and self-identify as Hindus, then they can get them to vote as Hindus. So when you lose a tribal to Christian conversion, it's like you've lost a vote. It's very important, okay? So tribals are a particular sort of a hot zone for these conversions and reconversions. Now, as Dr. Sharma pointed out, Orissa is one of the areas where we have a pretty good cluster of communal tensions between Christianity and Hinduism. This is Orissa, and there's lots of tiny, you can't see the lines, but lots of little districts within there. Excuse me. Orissa itself is 2.4% Christian. Okay, so in line with the larger, with the general percentage of the country. However, one of the central districts, a little district in there called Kandhamal, is actually 25% Christian. Okay, so Kandhamal has a very high percent of Christians compared to the rest of Orissa. So this is going to be a hot zone that we're going to talk about. Now, in Orissa we have, Dr. Sharma mentioned him at the beginning of his lecture, we have a very charismatic leader named Swami Lakshmananda Saraswati. And he was a Brahmin, guru-type figure, priest, who very articulate and very virulently speaking out against the Christians. Very polemic type of character. He was very active in tribals' rights, social services, so he did a lot of on-the-ground sort of campaigning for equality and rights, was very popular in his community. He was against these reconversions of tribals, or he was against conversions, he supported the reconversions of tribals. These reconversions are to bring them back into the Hindu fold, to counter this aggressive proselytizing. And he also had several run-ins with both Christian and Maoist groups. Now also along the same area of this kind of dense Christian population are the Naxals, or Naxalites. And these are Maoist organizations that have kind of a guerrilla military type of reputation. They're not my specialty, but there's a lot of work that's been done on the Naxals and their particular type of rebellion and how they relate to Hindu nationalism and politics. But Saraswati had issues, multiple occasions with Christians, but he also had them with the Maoists. He was not a friend to the Maoists either. So he's got two groups he's kind of antagonizing to start with. Now he believes, and so does the Sangh Parivar. The Sangh Parivar is the family of organizations of various Hindu nationalist groups. He believes that the Naxals are funded in part by Christian missionaries. Now, I'm not saying this isn't true. It's quite possible that it's true. I have a statistic here somewhere. The USA contributes $145 billion every year to fund Christian missionaries across the world. Okay, books and articles are printed in 500 languages, etc. So just thinking of the Christian mission in a very kind of business sort of way and the money that's fed into it. I would not be surprised if there was some kind of tie with the Naxals, there was some kind of funding. I don't know, there's no proof. There's debates on both sides. It's probably very patchy even if it is, but it has been suspected that the Naxals are totally in the Christians' pocket. Okay, so I think that's debatable. But anyway, it is something to consider that there might be some cross interests going on. He doesn't trust them for that reason. Oops, I'm going to back up one before I do that. Okay, so in 2007, at the very end of 2007, we're winding up right up to Christmas, we have a series of incidents. December 23rd, 2007, first of all, Narendra Modi, who is the Chief Minister of Gujarat, wins again. Longest-running Chief Minister, in the history of Gujarat. I think he's been CM since 2001. Modi is controversial because of his involvement and complicity in the pogroms against Muslims that happened in 2002. That's just the backdrop, and it'll relate in a minute. While that's going on in Gujarat, meanwhile, in the galaxy far away, right? In the Kandhamal district, we have an incident where a pastor is pulled out of a bus, and he gets head shaved, he's beaten, and he's paraded around naked. Okay, so that's the first incident. Next day, December 24th, Christmas Eve, we have a mob show up. RSS, Bajrang Dal, VHP, your basic usual suspects across the board of Hindu nationalism. They show up, they burn and tear down the Christmas pandal, kind of like the creche, and they go into church and they smash a bunch of windows. The police just stand around, you know, don't do anything. Then the next day, 3,000 strong, armed with, I'm reading from this now, 3,000 strong, armed with tridents, axes, crude bombs, and kerosene, came into the Church of Our Lady of Lourdes and burned it down. They used the palm oil for the lamps to set fire to the place and destroyed the entire church, furniture, etc. Now, that's December 25th. When reporters talked to Saraswati, this was his comment. You're just burning tires. How many Isai houses and churches have you burnt? Without Kranti, revolution, there could be no Shanti, peace. Narendra Modi has done Kranti in Gujarat, and that is why Shanti is there. I think it's anyone who knows anything about Gujarat to invoke that as a model of effective management of religious minorities should be upset by that. So we have this. This gives you just a snapshot of the very divisive, very virulent type of rhetoric that's being spoken. Now, this is not matching up with Vivekananda's view, right? We have a disconnect now. This idea of Hinduism and how the world should be, or Aurobindo and Vivekananda's sort of view, and then what's going on the ground in this particular area. Okay, so very incendiary, pun intended. Now, a couple months go by. There's continued tensions. That's kind of out of order. And these are, I showed you really fancy churches earlier. This is what the village churches look like. These are very, when we talk about the Communal district and their churches, these are not fancy cathedrals. These are small, local, brick and mud type churches, very, very modest. These are poor villagers. So we have Saraswati is killed, and pardon this gory picture, but there's a reason I'm putting it up. He is stormed by 6 people who storm into his office, and they kill him, and he's, I believe, 86 years old. What happens following that is these pictures, and these are not the goriest out there, but I wanted to put these up for a reason. These pictures are circulated, okay? They're circulated by hand and whipping up frenzy. Why am I showing these pictures? Because you're having an emotion. You should have an emotional reaction to these pictures, even if it's just gross, right? Emotion is such an important part of this conversation. We haven't talked about it much. When we talk about conversion, we're talking about proselytization, we're talking about religious minorities and majorities. Emotion is a key factor in how your views are shifted, how your views are manipulated, how your views are challenged, okay? This was part of this, and I'm always fascinated by propaganda, rhetoric, images, etc., how this is tied to emotion, how this is tied to these sort of discourses. But this was very deliberately used. Furthermore, they wrapped his body up in a shroud eventually, and they carried his body for 150 kilometers through the Communal district. What do you think happened when they did that? We have a pogrom. We have a very strategic one. It's not just rioting. There's a lot of discussion and evidence that has come out since then that this was very organized. Communal district, as an overall district, is a very rocky region. It's not like a big flat area that you can just like hop from one village to the other. It requires a lot of coordination. There was within a 72-hour period, we have destruction of 5 parish churches, 48 village churches, 5 convents, 7 hostels, 500 homes, and several church-run institutions. That's just what is officially documented, okay? Hundreds and hundreds of people leave their homes, run to the forest, okay, to survive. I think the total deaths was 57. I'm not sure if that's correct, though. So we have a serious backlash from Saraswati's killing. And as for who killed him, this is still being debated. There have been confessions by Naxals, Naxal guerrillas who came in and killed him. Of course, the conspiracy theory is that, they're paid by Christian missionaries, or maybe it's just Christians, we don't know. But Naxals have confessed to it, and it does seem to be kind of an act of terrorism on their part. We may never know, but this is still being discussed. Now, the problem with this, well, many problems with this, obviously. When this was going on, and this mob of Hindutva type of followers were going from village to village executing this, they were doing the reconversions. And this is the article I signed to you today, which, by the way, is not a scholarly article. It's a Tehelka article. It just tells you about the incident, just so you get a snapshot. But it's got a discussion of the reconversion ceremony. And in that article, it talks about the requiring them to burn the Bible and to disavow Christianity and swear that if they ever switch to Hinduism again, or switch to Christianity again, that they and all their seed will be wiped out. It's like really hardcore. But in this case, what they did was they said, are you a Hindu? The person's like, yes, yes, I'm a Hindu, don't kill me. Great, here's a torch, go burn that church. You know, they forced people who were newly converted, reconverted, to commit a lot of these acts of violence. So when we talk about coercion, this is obviously very far on one very nasty side of the spectrum. Coercion can also be very subtle. But this does happen. You know, we need to think about what is at stake when people are challenged and faced with that challenge to renunciate one faith and take another. What are the motivations? And is this about religion or is this about politics? That's a whole other question. So I want to ask, to kind of launch discussion. So what happened to our tolerant Hinduism? Okay, what's happening now with this? What happened to our idea of Hinduism as this accommodating, inherently tolerant, universal type tradition, and then what happened in Orissa? What is going on with this? Why do we have to feel that we have need to do a conversion or a reconversion? Why is Christianity such a threat? I think this relates to the reading that I signed for tomorrow, Arjuna Appadrai's Fear of Small Numbers, which is an excellent book. It's a small book, and I put only a couple selections, and it's a quick read, which I think a lot of what's in those selections you can chew on probably for this whole course. This idea of fear of small numbers, about what is the threat of the minority to the majority. How are they being challenged? Why are they being challenged? So that's something to think about, because I'll probably pick it up a little bit tomorrow. Yeah, caste does not go away with conversion. This is the problem. I've talked about when they convert that they lose their reservations, their status, and that's unfortunate because, as we know, we had 370,000 Dalits convert in a mass ceremony in 1956 with Ambedkar. Yes, they abandoned, the Hindu doctrine, the idea of rebirth and being tied to this kind of karmic destiny. But at the same time, it didn't change anything for them on the ground as far as how they were treated, unfortunately. And within these Christian communities, I mean, you can tell just by looking at these are rural areas, these are poor areas, these are very marginalized groups of people, probably not well educated, with very little access to resources. Now, there's a video clip, it's on YouTube. I might actually post the link. It's called Where Bibles Are Burnt. It's a fairly short clip. Maybe I'll post a link to it. But it talks about it shows a bunch of actually Hindu women storming into the refugee camps, which are still standing today, by the way. These homes, these towns have not been rebuilt. Okay, these people are living out of tents in refugee camps in the hills of Orissa, and they get, a little bit of dal and a little bit of rice every day, typical refugee camp type rations. And these Hindu women come in, and they're ripping the food out of people, and they're punching people and swinging, and they're saying, we're poor too. How come they're getting this special treatment? Not that that's particularly special treatment, but so you have this tension between the scheduled castes and the other Dalits too of the region. So yeah, it's very nuanced. It's very complicated. But yeah, caste is an extremely important part of this picture for sure. There was another hand up. It's glossed over, unfortunately. If you look at who's in charge in the BJP, BHP, etc., or even who the most of the members are, we're talking Brahmins. All right. When you're looking at the Bajrang Dal, the Karsebaks, which are like a little more of the on-the-ground militant arms of the RSS and stuff, these are Dalits. So the lower castes are actively recruited to be foot soldiers into the cause, for the Hindu nationalist cause. In their literature, in Hindu nationalist literature, the way they talk about Dalits, they talk about them as, of course, a part of our tradition, and they go back to the idea of, this stratification of society that's supposed to ideally function in this really wonderfully balanced way, and that you shouldn't discriminate. There should be, of course, they should be allowed to worship in temples, etc. Purity laws should just be abolished, etc. But again, then they ignore the fact that if you're not within the Hindu umbrella, so if you're not a Dalit who is Buddhist or Hindu or Jain, etc., that you don't count. And there is a large majority of, or a large body of Dalits who are either Muslim or Christian, or possibly don't affiliate with anything, and they fall between the cracks, unfortunately. And Hindu nationalism, Hindu nationalist groups really kind of gloss that, and they don't discuss that much, unfortunately. There are a couple scholars who are starting to really talk about it, though. Yeah, there's no tearing it down. Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's idealized. I think of like Arya Samaj especially had this idea of caste. I mean, this very natural, organic, divinely ordained system of organization for the universe. You know, it works great on paper. In reality, it doesn't quite work that way. But yeah, so yeah, they're still supportive of that. They're not critical of the caste system, of the Jati system in any sense. They feel that the scheduled caste, backwards caste type status lists, which help out these very low marginalized groups, helps fill in some of that and help them out. But otherwise, yeah, it's very glossed over, unfortunately. Any other questions? Go to my last slide. Oh, yeah, a couple more comments. I'll post these so you could read.